The views and content expressed on the following program are provided solely for informational and entertainment purposes. They do not constitute legal advice. A podcast is not a substitute for retaining a competent, licensed attorney to advise you on your specific legal situation.
Break the business, play is work and work is play. Power into creators, have fun along the way. Break the business, doing what it takes. Celebrate success and learn from the mistakes.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the show. It is time for Break the Business, where we empower indie creators and have some fun along the way. I'm Ryan Kairalla, and it is a pleasure to have you here this week. We got ourselves a cool program, lots of great stories, great guests this week, and we lead things off with a beloved co-host around here, musician, producer, all-around wonderful human being. Joining us this hour is going to be Zach Sloan. Hey, Zach.
What's up, Ryan?
Oh, good to hear from you. Good to see the backwards hat on that I know is just covering this beautiful swath of hair that we all know and love. There it is. Oh my God! It descends down in every direction. It is, it's loved by all. Just so good to hear from you, my friend. I'm really glad you're joining me on the journey this week with who we get to interview. Our guest in the second segment is musician and tech CEO Eric Hirshberg. And Zach, I know you already know a lot about Eric Hirshberg because you really do the guest prep. You always, whenever we have a guest on, you really dig into their file. If they're a musician, you immerse yourself in their catalog. It's awesome. But I want to give you the backstory of how Eric Hirshberg ended up on our show. And it was, we get a lot of emails from publicists around here pitching a great number of guests. We get way more publicist pitches than we have open slots to interview. And so you're always looking for kind of something unique and interesting, looking for a guest that's going to have something that they can uniquely contribute, maybe a different perspective that the viewers and listeners haven't heard before. And we definitely got it this week with Eric Hirshberg. So this is the pitch I get, Zach. I see on the top of it, it says, Eric Hirshberg's album Secondhand Smoke has been praised by critics. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then I see the name Eric Hirshberg. I'm like, oh, that's such an interesting coincidence. He's got the same name as the former celebrated CEO of video game giant Activision. I wonder, if he plays gigs and stuff, do people confuse the name and think that he's the big time video game industry CEO? And then I, read the pitch and I was like, oh, they're the same person. That is Eric Hirshberg, the former CEO of gaming giant Activision, who I didn't know also happens to be a really accomplished singer-songwriter who, since stepping down from Activision a few years ago, has fully thrown himself into being a singer-songwriter and is putting out a ton of albums and, seems to be really, driving some great engagement his way and taking on this new second life as a creative.
What's interesting, or at least what struck me as interesting about this individual, is anytime I go to somebody's Spotify profile right away and I see the number of streams they get or the monthly listeners, I'm always skeptical of how many of these are purchased and blah, blah, blah. And then you go to Eric Hirshberg's website and he's getting praise from Liz Phair. And I'm like, okay, so the dude's legit. I go listen to his tunes and I was like, all right, guy's actually really talented. I'm very curious to talk to him about how you balance the business mind with the creative mind and talk a little bit about that because the dude's songs are cool. They're actually really great.
Yeah. A dimension of his music career that I want to talk to him about, maybe get your perspective on it as well. From what I read in his interviews, maybe you kind of picked up on this too, it almost sounds like the creative pursuits in his life are almost a compulsion. He creates because he can't not create. He talks about how he gets an urge to songwrite and he'll forget to sleep. And he'll write whole songs and just not eat, not sleep because those wheels are always turning for him. He has to make music. He has to create. I hate to use the word addiction, but it sounds almost like an addiction. And have you encountered creators that are like that? Are you like that, Zach? Are you somebody who needs to stay up all night to write a song?
I know lots of people like that. I know plenty of musicians who do that. That was never my thing. I had a weird thing that I had a rule that I didn't stop writing a song. And I still try to do this. even though time's more strapped now that I have a child, is that I didn't stop writing the song until I at least had a rough draft completely finished. And that was lyrics and all.
Wow.
That it doesn't mean you don't edit it later. But I found that if I ever stopped, that oftentimes meant I would never go back. And so I sympathize, like I feel that compulsion that he's talking about, right? Because sometimes you're afraid if you don't get it done, it's going to go away. And I know lots of musicians who are like that, which means, sometimes you wake up at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, and you write a song because you don't want it to go away. But yeah, I think it's a pretty common, I shouldn't say common. I say a lot of people say they do that. A decent percentage actually do.
I wonder if that's what the root of that compulsion is for somebody like Eric Hirschberg. Is it the idea that they have to start, or they can't stop because they're afraid they might lose that spark that they've turned into a creative flame in that moment, and they have to see it to the end, or if something else is going on there. But as you know from knowing me for this long, I'm always a interested student of trying to learn more about the creative mind and what drives those people. And I know our viewers and listeners are going to find that intriguing as well. And also just find his story intriguing. I mean, I would imagine somebody with that much business background and that much creative ability is going to have some great advice for our viewers and listeners. So boy, am I interested in hearing more from him in the next segment.
Me too.
Yeah. Speaking of things going on in the music industry, Zach, I believe you and I similarly shared a laugh this week when we were going through our X/Twitter accounts and finding a pretty spectacular tweet from Sound Exchange. It's, Sound Exchange, for those who don't know, it's a nonprofit organization that handles all of the royalty payments for what are called passive internet radio sound recordings. So if you have a song that is played on internet radio or on Sirius XM satellite radio, for example, so non-terrestrial radio, digital performance royalties for sound recordings, Sound Exchange is the one that collects all those royalties and pays the artist. Side note, if you are an artist and you're not registered with Sound Exchange, do that. Go to Sound Exchange Direct, search that in Google, and get your account set up. There may already be money waiting for you there. But why we're talking about Sound Exchange is because they made a tweet earlier this week that just, I don't think they predicted what the results would be from it. Producer Lauren, do you have the tweet up there? Can you put that up for us? So Sound Exchange, tweeted out pretty innocently enough, if you could change one thing about the music industry tomorrow, what would you change? Now, Zach, you should know I like this question kind of with a perverse joy for two reasons. One, it actually reminds me of a question that I ask on another podcast I host. So I also host an education industry podcast. And whenever I have a guest on that show, I always close the interview with the same question, which is, if with the snap of your fingers you could make one change to the education system, what change would it be? So this is Sound Exchange's version of that. If you could make one change to the music industry, what would it be? So I kind of got a nice little kick out of that because it seemed like a question I would write. But what was really funny about this tweet, and I know you feel the same way, Zach, are the comments, are what people said about what they would change about the music industry, because it was just such a delicious combination of like people who are unhinged, people who said mean things about Sound Exchange, which was funny, and also just people who, on a more serious note, kind of lamenting the way that the music industry has shifted, and almost with a sense of nostalgia for kind of the record label model that I spent the early part of my career saying is broken. And so many people being so frustrated with like the big tech model of the music industry that exists today that they were looking longingly back, nostalgic at like the way it used to be with record labels. So just a couple of the comments here that I thought were funny. One person said if they could change one thing about the music industry, basically you get faster payments from Sound Exchange. Like pay us faster, which boy, does that hit me. Like I have clients who've been waiting months to get a Sound Exchange payment. Like I think I had a client who I registered in 2023. They're still waiting for their payments to come in. And I know they've had their music played on Sirius XM. So there should be at least some royalties in there. But it just drags, man. I don't know what it is about Sound Exchange, but they pay slow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I got a bunch of these, but like, what were some of your favorite replies to this tweet, Zach?
Okay, so my very, very favorite one is I'm gonna I just accidentally scrolled past it. It was bring back 2 to 5 album deals so that record companies had the opportunity to develop talent.
Oh,
And I was just like, that the album cycle, like, or the album deal like that, the 2 to 5 record deal was never about developing talent. It was always about trapping talent. That one cracked me up.
that response to that tweet like made me equal parts like sad. Like I was laughing and crying and laughing to keep from crying. I wrote a whole damn book in 2015 that was just all about why the multi-album deal is a scourge of the entertainment industry and is this terrible thing that we have to eradicate. I wrote a whole manifesto about this. And now here we are in 2024. Big tech has made things so bad that at least one person on Twitter is saying, hey, can we bring the multi-album deal back? And the answer is no, you don't want the multi-album deal back, okay?
Bad idea.
Like, look, I understand things are bad now, but like they weren't, that much better 9 years ago. All a multi-album deal is a label gets to trap you in a deal for up to 5 albums, and they can drag those releases out and keep you locked in the deal, and you can't record for anybody else. You become a prisoner under the shackles of a record contract. Like, the fact that, at least one person on Twitter is like missing that and longing for that either tells me that, like, one, we still have a great deal of ignorance about the way the industry used to be, or two, good Lord, how bad are things now that is what we look back on and say that was pretty good.
I will say, if you combine that response with a response that's further down, somebody else said, get rid of everybody in the industry who's in it for the money and only have people in the industry who love music. If you could make both of those things happen, then it might make sense. However, reality, I think, begs to differ with that one. But I have an answer, my personal opinion, Ryan. I'm curious your thoughts on it. I wish the music industry would stop placing a premium on artists doing covers.
So wait, is that your...
That's my personal response.
Oh, that's your personal thing.
Yep.
I'm inclined to agree with that. And not even just covers. I mean, because like, cover songs have existed forever. And certainly like we can all think back on like what our favorite cover song is. What I'm becoming frustrated with in this like new development in the music industry is not like what I would call pure covers, but almost like sequels and adaptations of songs, right? You're seeing more and more artists and labels who take songs that like were popular 10 years ago, and then they like take a little chunk of it and put it in a new song because they know it'll have a built-in audience. In the same way that like we all hate that Hollywood is so obsessed these days with sequels, adaptations, and remakes. Like Hollywood doesn't make any truly original movies anymore, right? Everything is based off of pre-existing IP. And that's happening with the music industry too. Like we're just rehashing and microwaving old music and just putting it in new songs because labels are so afraid to take risks. They want to already create a song that has a built-in audience, and boy, does that kill originality.
And I'll tell you, nobody else I think would agree with this more than Metal Dave, the old, who I will reference every time I get the opportunity. But I remember when this idea of sequels and rehashing of songs was actually cool and novel because Metallica did it like 6 or 7 years apart with The Unforgiven and The Unforgiven 2, which are both great songs. And now we're up to The Unforgiven 4, I believe. And I'm like, all right, guys, can we please stop this? I love your band, but this is getting a little old. And if Metallica is doing something that bothers me, I'm going to guess that, like, hearing some rehash version of an 80s pop song is going to kill me as well. I think your description of re-microwaving the leftovers is pretty perfect. I think that's spot on.
Well, I mean, but what it shows is it's a music industry that's afraid to take creative risks. And, they want, and that comes in multiple forms, right? We see it in the fact that more and more music is just based off of pre-existing IP in some way, is microwaved old music. We're seeing it in the way that the music industry has basically ended the demo deal and killed A&R departments, right? Labels don't want to build artists anymore. They want an artist that's already built. They want a turnkey property, and they just want to make money off it, right? They say don't even knock on our door as a record label unless you already have a built-in following, unless you already have an audience, unless you already have social media, unless you already have, numbers on TikTok, which of course makes us all wonder, well, if the artist has all that, why do they still need the major label? But, it didn't used to be that way. Labels used to have these thing called demo deals where they would actually like try to build and develop artists. We don't see that anymore. And I think another way where we see this troubling trend of labels not taking risks is just like over-reliance on algorithms and data. I mean, I can actually give you a great example of this phenomenon that happened just earlier this week. Lauren, I think you have the graph, or not the graphic, but the new ticker for this. I didn't have a chance to tell you about this story, Zach, but that way I can at least get your genuine thoughts on it, or not your genuine thoughts, your upfront thoughts on it, your fresh thoughts on it. So on November 5th, Zach, the Music Business UK Awards gave out its Sir George Martin Award to Max Lausada. Max Lausada was the longtime CEO of Warner Music. He helped cultivate some of the biggest names in music: Dua Lipa, Coldplay, Ed Sheeran. Max Lausada had a hand in all of those people. And Ed Sheeran in particular is a big fan of this guy. And he was actually on hand at this award show to present the Sir George Martin Award to Lausada, and gave a pretty powerful speech about not just how much he likes Lausada, but what he sees as kind of a troubling trend in the evolving role of labels and executives in the music industry. And I think what he says here, Zach, ties right into what we're saying about labels not being willing to take risks anymore. So of Lausada in the speech, Sheeran said, quote, "They don't make people like him anymore, music people. And if they do, they come around once in a generation. It's not about having a big marketing brain or being good at algorithms or jumping on the new hot things. It's about recognizing what are great, great songs and who are great, great artists, and allowing them to grow and not just dropping them after 2 duff singles. All the legacy artists we know and love today were developed over time and allowed to explore and fail and build and experiment. The industry is at risk of becoming reactionary rather than just following heart and gut feelings on things that are just good." I mean, in an economy of words, Ed Sheeran did a pretty good job of eviscerating why labels are particularly in a bad spot these days, even more so than when I wrote crappy things about labels 10 years ago in the Break the Business book.
Yeah, in your book, you talk a lot about how they were labels effectively killed creativity by the way they would treat artists, and I think Ed Sheeran is just taking it to the next level, right? So my knee-jerk reaction is I completely agree. When the music business is, and I don't think when he says there's a risk they become reactionary, I think they already are. I think whenever you start just reacting to what's going on, that not only devalues music, right? Because the most impactful music is the music that shakes something up, right? The Beatles were part of the reason the Beatles were big is because they threw the whole thing around. Peter Frampton became a big deal because he sold so many records. People were like, "Oh, you can actually do that? I didn't know it." Right. And so when you have the record industry now that's like waiting to see what hits so they can make more of that, what should be hitting is the new, fresh, innovative ideas. And I think that's why pop music feels so stale, is that it's all looking backwards and not looking forward. So good job, Ed Sheeran. I liked you before. I still like you.
I mean, we all love Ed Sheeran around here. That I'm with you on that. But yeah, I think I can think of no more stinging indictment of today's record label model than what he says there, which is just that, like, they're not trying to break new ground anymore. Record labels aren't taking risks. They're not developing undeveloped projects and turning them into the voice of their generation. They're not letting an artist fail a few times before they eventually find the hit. And I think he says it right. They're reactionary. They're not being proactive. They're waiting for something to bubble up and then they take advantage of it. We saw that when we talked about, like, with TikTok or with artists on TikTok. You're hearing stories of record labels that will tell an artist that they're signed to, we're not going to put out your next single until you make something pop on TikTok. Make a video with that song on it and make it successful. Like get 1 million people to watch your video, and then we'll use the momentum from that to sell your music. And that's frustrating because like virality on TikTok is often a crapshoot. There are plenty of amazing videos that just don't hit the algorithm right. But like, what's more reactionary than that? Like, we're gonna follow whatever way the wind blows on TikTok rather than use talented, brilliant executives to find ways to market and develop artists in interesting ways to move the industry forward, rather than like follow where the industry is going.
And it goes back to your original point. If the artist can get 1 million views on TikTok, what's the label really doing? I think an interesting thing that I've discovered through this is there are some independent, like, because I'm a guitar nerd. There are independent guitar players who make like lesson videos and stuff on YouTube, and that's driven me to their music. And these are like experimental, wild guitar players who probably have no space on a record label. A record company probably doesn't look at some experimental instrumental guitarist and think there's money in that. But they're doing it and they're able to do it. And if there was a little bit more of a push, maybe more people would appreciate that music instead of not understanding it. The labels, though, this is nothing new. They've been failing the general populace for years, decades. I mean, screw them.
It's very well said.
There's my thought process.
Right. It's just a new way for them to fail. Right. I
like
wrote
that.
all about, them not paying artists enough. 10 years ago, I was writing all about how labels aren't paying artists enough and how they lack imagination. And somehow in 2024, they pay them even less and they are even more lacking in imagination. But, and again, it just gets back to my central thesis from that book 10 years ago, which is you have to find the alternative path, because there are still artists out there who are proactive and they're breaking new creative ground and they're trying things and failing and getting to try again. Those artists are out there. They're just not signed to the major labels. They're independent and they need the support of fans like you and artists like you and the community of creatives to help cultivate those artists, to help them make their mistakes and to help them get better. But that's where the creativity is. That's where ultimately we're going to find the things that move the industry forward, because it's not going to come from the major labels.
I sense a sequel. Let's bring it back. Break the Business 2. Record companies, a new way to fail.
Business harder.
Business harder.
I think at least once a week I get somebody emailing me asking if I'm going to write another one of those books. But there's just, part of it is like, I don't see a sequel happening for two reasons. One being like, I have a 2-year-old. I don't have time for anything anymore. I wrote that first book at a time where I had surprisingly few responsibilities as a young attorney. And then the second is just that, like, what I'd have to write now would be so much more depressing than what I wrote even 10 years ago, that frankly, just the idea of putting it into paper, rather than just being able to talk about it with my friends every week on the radio show would, sounds pretty terrible. But I try to, like, let's see what other funny responses to that Sound Exchange tweet were. You talk about like the having to pass a test before you take label money.
Yep.
Yeah.
I one thing that I found was interesting is the number of people who said get rid of streaming, which I understand where they're coming from. I think what they mean is streaming should pay more. One thing, because I have two thoughts about this, right? One is that streaming is great because you in your home can make it a song or a record, get it into your distributor of choice, maybe not TuneCore, but your distributor of choice, and get it out there and people can listen to it relatively easy. The flip side is that because there's so much of that saturation, you don't get paid much. I don't think I would support getting rid of streaming altogether. But I do wish there was an emphasis on people still buying physical music, or at least downloading it from a store.
Well, I think what people lament about the rise of streaming, in addition to, obviously as a consequence of it paying so low, is between now and like 20 years ago, there's a shift in like what a streaming song is, right? 20 years ago, recorded music was very clearly a product.
Right.
In the olden days, when you and I were like in high school or younger, it was a product, a physical product that you had to buy, but it was still considered a product. It was the end result of what you tried to get consumers to do for that artist, was to buy the thing and pay cash for it. And then and even like a few years later when downloading was a thing, the music was still the product. You had to pay the 99 cents to download that product, or the $1.29 to download that product, and it was still a product. It was a product that put less money in artists' pocket once we went into the digital world, but it was still a product. Now today, it's not a product. It's, you know, it pays so little, and most middle-class artists aren't going to be able to pay their rent from streams, that for the middle-class artists, for people who aren't Ed Sheeran, streaming is not a product anymore. It's not a thing that people consume and it directly puts money in your bank account. It's maybe at best a loss leader. It's a commercial for that
Yes.
artist. You know, you stream that person's music enough, you fall in love with that person as an artist, then you go see them in concert, or you buy their merchandise, or you create enough of a fan base around them that maybe some TV show catches wind and wants to put that song in their TV show and pay that artist money. But so when I read those responses to that Sound Exchange tweet, what I'm really getting is that a lot of people aren't lamenting that streaming exists in theory, because I think it is great that you can just get any song on your phone at any time, but they're lamenting that the thing that used to be a product that they can sell and get money from is now essentially just a free commercial, and now you have to drive your fans to something else that's going to make you money.
And I think the one thing we have overlooked in all of these responses is clearly the GOAT response on this one. The Orem 10 said what he thinks is missing from the current music industry is more cowbell.
That's the only right answer, by the way.
He is correct, or they are correct. I don't know who this is. I haven't looked at their profile.
That is the best answer to that tweet. Absolutely. You had mentioned TuneCore, Zach. And
What?
You can't just
Foreshadowing?
like sneak TuneCore into there and say TuneCore is having a bad day without us talking about this. This is pretty wild. Earlier this week, Music Business Worldwide, Billboard, all the major outlets reported that Universal Music Group and a bunch of other major music companies have sued Believe, which is the parent company for distribution service TuneCore, for, what was it, $500 million.
No less than $500 million.
Oh, here you go. Alleging that Believe in TuneCore has engaged in massive ongoing infringements of these labels' sound recordings. Many of our viewers and listeners who've distributed music use TuneCore, so they were probably pretty surprised about this. From the article, we've actually had the CEO of TuneCore on this show before.
I know. When I was making that joke, I was like, I hope this isn't bad. Oh, well.
Yeah. I don't know if she'll come on our show again after this, but from the article in Billboard, quote, lawyers for the plaintiffs, so that would be the record labels, claim that Believe/TuneCore makes little effort to hide its illegal actions, and that the allegedly infringing recordings are, quote, often minor variants on the names of famous recording artists and titles of their most successful works, end quote. The complaint says that the alleged fraudsters attempt to avoid detection of the allegedly infringing recordings, some of which they claim are sped up or remixed versions of popular songs, by using misspellings of popular artist name, including Kendrick Lamar with no C. It's Kendrick, Kendricklamar.
Yeah, Kendrick Lamar.
Ariana Grande, Justin Bieber, and Lady Gaga, or I guess two L's together, Lady Gaga, so Yady Gaga.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting lawsuit, because when I first read the lawsuit and I heard that, you know, the labels were suing TuneCore because people are using TuneCore to distribute, unauthorized music that the labels own on a TuneCore, my first thought was, how can you sue TuneCore for this? This sounds like a pretty clear, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, immunity, right? Generally, if people, violate copyrights using an online service, the online service is generally not liable for the user's misconduct if the service provides some means to be able to report infringement and root it out. So my first thought was like, oh, TuneCore is just going to argue that, hey, this isn't us doing it, this is our users doing it. Mm-hmm. And so like you can't sue us, go sue the users for distributing the Ariana Grande song. And then, when you read the lawsuit, like the labels actually make a pretty compelling argument, and this is true about streaming services, which is the streaming service against distribution services. The distribution service model is it's pretty manual labor on the part of the distribution service. Like when you use like a TuneCore or a CD Baby, you have to provide the information in the distribution service, about the recording, and the distribution service has to actually put the music on Spotify and Apple Music and things like that. And so I think the label's argument is, hey, TuneCore, when you get this song and it says Ariana Grande on it, or it's the same title as a popular song, but it just says remix or sped up, maybe you should look into that. Maybe listen to the song and make sure that it's actually a song that somebody else doesn't own, like Universal Music. And it's going to be interesting to see what courts think of that argument. Like, does the fact that, could they argue that, hey, TuneCore knew about this unauthorized use, and so they're liable for it as well? And again, if that is true, if they can find liability there, that could be a pretty significant damage award because, you couldn't count the amount of unauthorized music that gets uploaded through distribution services like TuneCore.
Well, and is there not an AI that's just Shazam everything that comes through? Can we not do that yet and make sure that you're not doing dumb stuff? One interesting comment came through on Twitch, I believe. Does this include Kids Bop? And I'll tell you, I hope so, but I doubt it. I'm guessing.
Does it include? Believe. As the parent of a small child, and I know you feel the same way, Zach, anything that gets Kids Bop out of the world so that we never have to listen to it again could be something I'm into.
Yeah.
I shouldn't even joke with that because I actually met the guys who run Kids Bop. It's a label called Razor and Tie. I think the guys who founded Razor and Tie actually went to my law school. I think we're fellow law school alums. But for Kids Bop, all of that is perfectly legal and authorized. Razor and Tie absolutely gets mechanical licenses to do all of these terrible small child covers of songs that you know and love.
Yeah, of course they do.
Yeah.
Like, the thing that struck me is really interesting, or I guess the thing that hit me about this, right, is that so Universal Music is effectively arguing that TuneCore and their parent company believe, right, that it's almost as if the accusation when you read through it is they're saying you knew, you did it anyway, and you shall suffer. Like that's how this reads to me. And the effect as you're bringing up is that TuneCore had the opportunity to effectively avoid royalty fraud, but stood back, took their cut, and got it, and hope that nobody would catch them. But correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan. This has happened before on YouTube, where people have been uploading music claiming royalties that weren't theirs as well. So I think there's we've at least seen something like this before, just maybe not on this scale.
Oh my God. It happens all the time on the internet, right?
I guess the internet generally, yeah.
YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, all of these platforms have a uncountable amount of copyright infringing content that runs through those platforms all of the time. Facebook, Twitter, it's everywhere. But the reason why all of those platforms don't get sued into oblivion is because we have the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that says that all of those platforms are not responsible for the infringing acts of their users as long as you provide a means to allow people whose works have been infringed to report the infringements to the website, and then the website takes it down. The reason why that might not apply to TuneCore, as best as I can gather, is they're trying to argue that TuneCore is not a passive participant. Like TuneCore is not just leaving their platform up and then people are using it to infringe copyrights. The labels appear to be arguing that TuneCore is actively involved in this, right? Yeah. Like that they're actually, they're helping upload this music. They know that at least some of it's infringing. And, there might be something to that argument because when you use TuneCore, you don't get a direct, like if you're using TuneCore, CD Baby, DistroKid, you don't get it doesn't give you a direct line to Spotify. It's not like you upload your music, you enter the information, and then it just goes directly into Spotify. There is a human or perhaps some type of tech thing in TuneCore that acts as an intermediary that actually has to upload and set up everything. And I think what the labels are going to argue is that in that middle process where TuneCore is actively helping get the music onto Spotify, they're in a position to root out infringement and they're not doing it, which makes it different from like the YouTube, Facebook scenario where you can just put content on YouTube and YouTube has no idea what you're doing.
Clearly.
Clearly, whenever
YouTube.
you look at what's going on YouTube. But yeah, that's going to be interesting. Definitely an interesting case to follow. And depending on how that case comes down, could have pretty significant implications about not just TuneCore, but all of these distribution services and what it's going to mean in terms of how they have to change their practices.
What a time to be alive, Ryan.
Gosh, yeah. Let us go ahead and take a break. We're going to have Eric Hirschberg joining us here on Break the Business. Don't go anywhere. Break the Business is presented in cooperation with Ryan A. Kairalla, PA. Ryan A. Kairalla, PA is a law firm providing transactional entertainment legal services, including contracts, business formation, commercial law, copyright, trademark, and more. Ryan A. Kairalla, PA, Miami, Florida. rkpalaw.com.
Streaming services for Break the Business provided by LEK Entertainment. LEK Entertainment is a full-service entertainment company offering everything from consultations to full-scale events and productions, including audio and video productions, voiceovers, staged theatrical productions, script and music development, and streaming services. For more information, visit lekentertainment.com. LEK Entertainment wants to help you bring your story to life.
Thanks for supporting Break the Business. If you have a question or topic that you want us to discuss, email us at breakthebusiness@gmail.com. You can follow the host, that's me, on Twitter at Ryan Kair, and you can follow the show at the BTB Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, and on all major podcast platforms. And now, let's get back to the show. Welcome back to Break the Business, everybody. Ryan Kairalla here with Zach Sloan, having just a grand old time on SiriusXM 145, all major podcast platforms, live streaming platforms such as our favorite live streaming partner, Volume.com. There's just so many places to catch this show, and we're just so glad that you are. How are you feeling, Zach? All smiles on your end, sir?
Well, I'm pretty excited to talk to an actual musician here in a minute. Wait, that came out wrong. I'm not implying that Ryan is not a musician. That's not what I meant.
No, you don't need to imply that. You can just say that explicitly.
Well, it came out of my mouth. Like, it sounds snarkier than I meant. I'm just really excited. Like, we've been sort of doom and gloom over here, as I typically am. And I love talking to actual creators and people who maybe have a different take on things than I do. And I think Eric might be that guy. So I can't wait.
Boy, you really set him up, huh? Like, talking about setting the expectations high. Well, I think he's going to deliver anyway. Let's go ahead and bring out our guest this week.
From suits and ties to melodies, our journey started with wild dreams. From boardroom hustle to strumming strings, now it's crafting heartfelt themes. Eric Hirschberg's tale unfolds from corporate heights to music's gold. With every note and lyric song, he's found his place where hearts are one.
Our guest this week is an LA-based singer-songwriter and tech executive who served as the president and CEO of video gaming giant Activision before stepping down in 2018 to pursue music full-time. His latest album, Secondhand Smoke, was celebrated by Music Mecca as, quote, a unifying force that gives harmonious visibility to communities and the individual circumstance. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting erichirschbergmusic.com. We are happy to welcome Eric Hirschberg on to Break the Business. Hello, sir.
Nice to see you. How are you?
I am doing just grand. I got lots of questions for you about, your past, present, future, what you've done in business, what you've done in music. There is just so many rich veins that we can tap. But the first question I have to ask is sort of a selfish one that reflects on my own parenting situation, because I'm the parent of a 2-year-old, and so I'm reading all the parent of 2-year-old books right now, and I noticed that the last track on your latest album, Secondhand Smoke, is called Goodnight Nobody.
Yeah.
And I am curious, is that a Goodnight Moon reference?
It is. There's that song it's the only song on the album, by the way, that I didn't write. My brother Glenn wrote it, and it's a beautiful song. But there's a page in the book, Goodnight Moon. If you have a 2-year-old, you probably know this. They're saying goodnight to all the artifacts around the room in the house and, all the people in the family. And then there's just a weird kind of spooky page that says goodnight nobody. And I don't quite know what the author meant by that, but it's, I think it's something that haunted my brother. And I've always loved that song. And so I covered it and put it on the album. It just kind of fits with a lot of the themes of the other songs on the record.
Right on.
By the way, Zach, I just want to make sure that you saw that I updated my title for you after that.
I love that you have a real good one, and somehow I screwed up mine where mine says guitarist for Dear Marcia twice for some reason. I don't know what I did.
Well, this program allows you to update the title. So when you said an actual musician, that's my new title for the evening.
Well, you are, and can I ask you a quick question about your guitars?
Sure.
Is that Les Paul you got in the background? Is that your one from the Unbroken video?
It is.
That guitar is super. I'm a Les Paul guy myself. That guitar is awesome. Okay, Ryan, you can ask real questions.
And thank you for nerding out on the Unbroken video. I appreciate that.
Zach,
great song.
I have a binding court order that prevents you from letting the interview descend into gear talk for at least 10 minutes. All right. Like, I understand that whenever Zach Sloan is co-hosting, it's gonna, especially when we're interviewing a musician, I know it's gonna descend into gear talk and I'm gonna fall asleep. But you gotta let me get at least a couple career questions in first.
That's cool. Dude, but Zach, what I heard is that we can go back in 10 minutes to talking about guitars.
That's what I heard. And I'll tell you what, that Les Paul is cool.
Like, just give me 10 minutes. Like if we could put 10 minutes on the clock.
Ryan, I'm yours. Fire away.
All right. Well, let me get right into like the most obvious question that I think is probably a version. You've probably gotten a version of this with every interview you get. And so I apologize, but I think it's pretty interesting because we don't get a lot of, video gaming CEOs that turn musicians on our program. But I am curious, what made you want to go from being the CEO of Activision to becoming a full-time musician? I'm assuming it was for the money.
Well, listening to the tail end of the conversation you guys are having about the, wonderful world of streaming services, that's not the case. So I would say that you asked the question a little bit in reverse. I think the way it actually played out in my life, I went from being a musician to being a CEO, not vice versa. I've been a musician. I've been writing songs since I was a teenager. I've been in rooms like this, or at the time, when I was younger, walk-in closets, with gear stuffed into them. And, my whole life I've been writing songs and it's kind of been with me for a long time. And it never degraded to what I would call sort of hobby status. It never was something that I did when I had time. It was something that I always just sort of had to make time for. And that's the difference in my mind. And I was not just the CEO of Activision. Before that, I was the CEO of the ad agency Deutsche LA, which I built with a partner. And so I was a CEO for over 20 years in two different industries. And it was time for me to step down for a bunch of reasons, not just the music, but, I wanted to rewire my life in a bunch of different dimensions. And I had a great run and I had a great time and I'd learned a ton and done well enough to be able to make that choice. But the first thing I wanted to do when I stepped down was record an album, because as I became more and more public as an executive, maybe this was all in my head, but I just was not comfortable putting my music out after a certain point. I think it was around the time I got to Activision where I was suddenly the officer of a public company. I mean, I went to art school. I didn't go to business school. I sort of became a CEO by accident by being a good leader of creative industries. So in advertising, I was the CEO and the chief creative officer as well. I was actually making the Super Bowl commercials and actually pitching the clients' ideas and, had my hands on the clay. When I became the CEO of Activision, I'm not a game maker, but I certainly participated with creative ideas in the development of our games in ways that I think most more left-brained executives probably would not have. And as I got to Activision, I realized, okay, you've got an earnings call every 12 weeks with Wall Street analysts. No one wants to hear your love songs, man. And it became kind of this secret life. And, I remember I had this moment where a very good friend of mine who I'd made through my work life, but it was a real friend, not just a work friend, someone who knew my wife, knew my kids. I knew his family, someone I would confide in, about personal things, came to my house for a cocktail party and looked in the corner and saw a guitar on the stand and said, "Oh, who in the house plays guitar?" And at that moment, I realized like how completely hidden from view I had made the music. So it was just always, nagging at me and was turning into a little bit of a, deathbed regret in the making. So I wanted to put myself out there publicly and put it out there.
I've read that, and Zach and I talked about this a little bit in the very beginning of the show. I've read about you that your drive to write songs is something of a compulsion. I've heard you say that you always want to write, and then when you start writing, you can't stop until the song is done. You said that you'll forego sleep. Is part of what drove you into back into making music full time just that this compulsion is always with you, and maybe you were kind of like pushing it down while you were a CEO, and now you can't push it down anymore?
I wasn't successfully pushing it down. I was neglecting sleep and other things in life in order to service this passion. But to me, I've thought a lot about this topic that you're bringing up. And I think it's my definition of the difference between commercial art and fine art, because I've spent a lot of my life as a commercial artist. When I was in advertising, as a creative director, as an art director, as a writer, you learn a craft, and it has a lot of, ingredients in common with fine art. When you're making commercials, you're writing, you're filmmaking, you're scoring, you're casting actors, you're designing beautiful layouts and doing great photography. These are all the same tools that fine artists use, but you're doing it, you're marshaling it at a bullseye. You're aiming it at a purpose to communicate something on someone else's behalf. And so you learn tricks and you learn to get good at it, and you learn to use the tools to do it sort of on a deadline and with a particular, goal in mind. And fine art, to me, the definition of that and how my music has always behaved in my own mind is just, it's kind of on its own time schedule. And it lets you know when you're going to write a song. And I talk about it in the third person like that, because it really does feel almost like a second being in there that's like, oh, there it is. That's the chorus. I gotta get to a guitar, and it comes when it comes. And, sometimes it comes at very inopportune times. I have, I know a lot of songwriters who voice recordings has become like this always on your body tool that you can capture thoughts as they happen. And so, yeah, I've always made time for it, but I don't really feel like I've had a choice. I feel like I just sort of had to do it.
And so I imagine that kind of compulsion was super inconvenient, when you had, back-to-back meetings in the middle of the day.
And 2 young kids like you have now, and, a very full life. Yeah. There are a number of songs that I've written just about having life be a little overfull at times.
Well,
all high-class problems, though.
Have you found that having this musical skill, this fine art creative side of you, has it helped you in business? Like, does that creative side help you make like the CEO decisions too?
The music specifically, definitely being creative has helped me in business. I think that's been my, unique contribution as a business leader, is that, there aren't many people with an art degree who've gone on to run a company the scale of Activision. I gave a commencement address at my alma mater, which is the School of Arts and Architecture at UCLA, back in, I think it was 2016. And I looked it up at the time, and there were no I ran a division of Activision Blizzard. Activision is not the stock ticker, but it's the biggest division of the company. And if it were a standalone company, probably like a Fortune 200 or Fortune 300 company. And I looked it up at the time, and guess how many Fortune 500 companies CEOs there were with an art degree?
Oh my gosh. It's either going to be really high or really low, or it wouldn't be an interesting question.
That number is 0.
Oh, okay. There you go.
I haven't looked it up since, but at that time, there were more Fortune 500 company CEOs with no degree than an art degree. So that gives you an idea of how unusual it is to go from, what I call a hands on the clay. There are a lot of people who are creative, meaning they have good taste and they have good creative sensibilities, but they're not hands on the clay makers. So it was a really unusual path for me. And being a creative person who could also learn the language and speak the language of business and speak the language of strategy and learn the language of finance and those things. They were not natural for me. I grew up with dyslexia. I grew up with, all the creative ailments, But when I got the job at Activision, I was still at Deutsche. There was like a 2-month period where I'd given notice, and I bought one of those. It's on this shelf somewhere. I bought one of those yellow and black striped books for dummies, blank for dummies. It was called Reading Financial Reports for Dummies, because I didn't want to show up on my first day and not know any of the lingo or not know any of the acronyms or anything. I can only talk about that now because I was there for 8 years and it was a success, but at the time I made my wife read it too. I said, you got to read this too. I need your help explaining.
Come
this.
on.
I swear to God.
Glorious.
It's like right now there's like a board of directors at Activision who just heard that. They're like, what the hell were we thinking?
We dodged a bullet.
It reminds me of that like this is such a dated reference, but there was an old episode of The Simpsons where Homer is trying to think of like ways that he can improve the marketing and sales of a bowling alley that he works at.
Yeah.
And so you see a scene where he's like reading a book and the book says advanced marketing. And then like in the next scene, he's thrown that book in the trash and he's holding a book that says beginning marketing. And then like a few seconds later, you see that book in the trash and you see him holding a dictionary and he's like running his finger over the word marketing.
Well, at least as it relates to, the sort of more advanced finance, technical finance parts of the business, I was on about the Homer level at that point. But obviously I wasn't hired for that, part. You don't go to the chief creative officer and co-CEO of an ad agency for their, financial acumen. You go because you want someone who's got a creative sensibility and, some marketing chops and can maybe speak to the creatives and to the developers in a different way. And that's that. And I got to give a lot of credit because the guy who hired me, his name's Bobby Kotick. I was actually really trepidatious about it. We had gotten to know each other a couple of years earlier and we'd become friendly. And, he had offered me a number of other jobs that I'd turned down because I was really happy I'd built this agency and, with a partner and it was my baby. And, but he called me up and he said, I finally figured out how I'm going to get you to come work for me. How's that? He said, you're going to come be the CEO. And I said, okay, don't do anything stupid now. Like, I know you really want me to work for you, but that sounds that you got a real company over there. Like I'm basically the RA of a dorm floor, running a creative company like an ad agency is nothing like running a software company, an entertainment company. And so at a certain point I said, listen, I really am trepidatious. I want to make sure I'm not representing that I'm anything that I'm not. I know I have the title CEO right now, but there are things I'm not going to know. And he said something that convinced me to, get over my hesitation. He said, what you don't know, I can surround you with and you can learn. And what you do know is what I think we really need in leadership of the company right now. And so, good on him for taking a gamble on a creative person and paid off for both of us. And that's how I got into that situation. But I think the question you asked me a long time ago now was, did the music help me in my business life? I would say one element for sure, which is being in bands. If you've led a band or been in a band, you know how to run a creative organization. Like everything that I learned in high school about how to manage the different contributions and the different egos and make sure everybody's bought in and make sure everybody feels ownership of it. That is what CEOs of creative industries deal with all the time. I don't care whether it's Hollywood, fashion design, advertising, design, video games. If it's a band, if it's a team sport that's making something together, people's egos get involved. People have sense of ownership. People don't have sense of ownership. People reject ideas that they didn't come up with sometimes, or, there's different things you have to navigate. I learned how to do all of that by playing in a band.
And I definitely get the essence of what you're saying there about, being able to manage the interpersonal dynamics of a band can make you a good CEO. And so, if you can run a band well, you can run a company well. At the same time, like I'm thinking about all the guys that I was in my high school garage band with and just imagining any of them running a lemonade stand, much less a Fortune 500 company. Yeah. That guy in my band who leapt off of an amplifier to crash into a tower of beer cans at a house party concert when we were 17 years old. That's the guy who needs to be running a big company.
Right.
All right. Zach, All right, go for
been
it, Zach.
12
You,
minutes.
yes, I know. You're right. You even gave me a bonus 2 minutes. Go ahead. Gear questions.
Actually, I don't have a gear question. What I want to know is, this is something when I was reading about you and looking at interviews that you've given before. So, given your background, music, advertising, games, or software, back to music, is there a common thread that you've learned about how to build a successful brand? And is the brand you're building as a musician substantively, and or maybe even more, I mean, completely different, or is that branding for a musician completely divorced from what you would do in your other walks of life? How do you balance that, and how do you make it successful?
It's a great question, Zach. Well, first of all, I have come to I've actually thought about this a lot too. I feel like through my advertising life, and then also, the job at Activision was also very heavily about brand building. I was, I when I got to Activision, I feel like not just the company, but the industry was treating games almost more like movie studios. They were running,
Yeah.
they're doing game trailers with clips from the games, and the commercials and the branding wasn't conceptual, and it wasn't, it wasn't advertising the way Nike advertised to you, or the way, a real brand that's trying to imbue a long-term relationship into the recipe with the consumer. And when I first got to Activision, we came up with this great ad campaign that lasted, pretty much, I think, the whole time I was there, called "There's a Soldier in All of Us," right, for Call of Duty. And it was sort of the game come to life. But I thought, like, the thing that was missing from the game marketing was the gamer. The gamer is part of the game. Your voice is the voice you hear the most when you're talking to your friends over the headphones, and your humor and your smack talk and your competitiveness. Those are all things that you don't see if you're just showing clips from the game, right? So it was all about the game come to life and the gamer, coming to life as well. But the question you asked is, I have found it very hard to apply the same branding principles that I'm so able to apply readily to other people or other people's companies or other brands to myself. And I think that just might be like a DNA level challenge. I think it's really hard to turn those, because part of what you need to do is you need that outsider's perspective to see how a consumer sees the brand, to see how a user or a fan would see the brand. And it's so hard to decenter from your own music and your own art, and to look at it objectively. But I guess that's what I've tried to do, because what I think you asked if there's a secret to building great brands, and brands are sets of shared values with the people who use them. And if you can imagine a Venn diagram with three circles, there's what's true about the brand, there's what's true for the consumer, and there's what's true in culture. And where you find those three things overlapping, that's where the most powerful brands live. And so that's probably the closest thing I've come up with to a formula. But I always try to make sure that you're saying something that's true about the brand, true about the consumer, and true about this moment in culture that we're living through.
Sorry, I'm drawing a Venn diagram right now because I think that is some of the best advice I've ever heard. Like, I literally am drawing that out on my
That's
notes.
cool.
That's really insightful. So when you're looking at that, plus in a time where we're looking at analytics, how do you avoid allowing the numbers to just drive your songwriting? Or is it similar to where your creative brain is so divorced from that you do the music and then you figure out the business side later?
Yeah, I think the explosion of data that we have at our disposal now, I don't know if it's making us any better at this.
I agree.
I don't like. I have a post. If you guys scrolled through my Instagram, you'll see that most of the reels were shot over 1-2 day shoot with my whole band, and I shot every song, and I've been editing them into the little bite-sized vertical 30-second clips that you need these days to feed the algorithm of social media beasts. And one of them went truly viral. I got 5.3 million views, and that's not the neighborhood my stuff lives in. My stuff lives in I when I started out, I was lucky if I got 1,000 views on something, and then eventually I got one that cracked 10,000. And then I have a few. If you look at the best performing ones, are a couple 100,000 views. This we got 5.3 million. No one can tell me why. It's not materially different from any of the other. It's kind of has the same look and feel. It was chorus 2 of track 7. It was Unbroken. It was Unbroken, the song that you asked me about the guitar.
Yeah.
So there had already been a chorus 1 video. So that chorus had been out before with the same, kind of look and feel to the video. And then I also looked at it and said, is there any correlation to any other lift? Did the music video on YouTube get a spike at that time? Did Spotify spike? Not really. It's like a lamp that lights only itself. It casts no light anywhere else, or a fire that only warms itself. Like if you touch it, the fire's warm, but the room's not any warmer. That's how social media feels to me. And if you think about it as a marketing tool, the interests are really unaligned between what the marketer wants and what the platform wants. The platform, I want them to leave. I want them to go follow me on Spotify, I want them to go actually download the album or go buy the vinyl or go, become a follower on a music platform, not scroll to the next tile. What does Instagram want? They
Stay put.
They want you to never leave. That's why they create as much friction as possible. That's why they give you one link, put it in your bio. And then when you scroll, if someone scrolls away to go find the link in the bio, they're like, whoop, whoop, we got one. He's leaving, throw up whatever video is going to make him stay, So the interests are really misaligned if you can't complete the transaction inside their ecosystem. Right. So if you're selling something and it's like click here and okay, I just bought the backpack, or the hair gel or whatever they're selling you. Fine, you didn't have to leave Instagram. They'll help you do that. But if your goal is to get them to leave and go to a different platform, it's not going to be a very hospitable place for your marketing efforts.
Man, there's a lot of really thought-provoking stuff in there. You just made me think about these platforms in a whole new way, and just the idea of the interests of the creator being so misaligned, or the marketer being so misaligned from the interests of the platform.
The other thing that happens, I found with social, that's frustrating, although maybe I just have to get over this because I'm a 20th century animal. I care about albums. I care about quaint things like people listening to the whole song in order. Mm-hmm. But I've had people who are in my life or who I meet, like Zach, when you said, "Oh, great song, Unbroken," and I've had conversations like that where I go, "Oh, great," and then I want to know more. I want to learn more. Where did you listen to it? Oh, just on Instagram. And so I love your song. I love your song. Oh, which one? Unbroken. That's my favorite. And they'll know a lyric, and they really have had, a good consumption of it, but they've heard 30 seconds of it. And then they moved on. And that was satisfactory for them enough to remember it and tell me about it. And to me, I'm like frustrated. Like, well, you haven't heard the song. You've heard, that reel. So maybe we all need to get over that. It's like, that's part of how music is consumed these days, in these kind of short bites. And, but on my darker days, I feel like, okay, so great. I was good Instagram content. That's not what I set out to do. I was a good tile in somebody's scroll that day.
Well, no, I don't want us to just get over that. I don't want you to just be a tile in somebody's scroll. I encourage our viewers and listeners to check out our guest Eric Hirschberg's latest album, in full, in order of tracks, Secondhand Smoke. Really terrific work. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting erichirschbergmusic.com. Eric, this has been a real treat, my friend. Before we let you go, though, we got one last question for you.
Please.
Do you have any last tips for the indie creators out there to help them move their careers forward?
Oh, man, I don't know if I'm the right guy to this. I'd love to be on a label. I heard you guys saying, what does the label do? I have a little bit of an opposite opinion that might be contrarian. And I know that your book is about, how to buck the label system and make it as an indie musician. I just look at the results, and I look at the ones that are, getting the most streams, getting, onto tours, and they all seem to, a lot of the ones that break through seem to be on labels. And it's a really hard racket doing this independently, for sure. Tips, I would say the things that have gone well for me that I think, I'm pleased with is that the content is true to me. I was really uncomfortable. A lot of the best practices with social media are things I wasn't going to do. You'd talk to an expert and they're like, just wake up every morning and grab your phone and talk to your fans and then make everything interactive, have them vote on which chorus they like better, or which name for the song they like better, or give them things to, vote on. And I'm like, I'm not going to do any of that. So I figured out a way to create good content that people seem to appreciate, that's authentic to me, that's all about the music, and what I did was I let people into the process a little bit, and they all feel a little behind the scenes. They don't feel overly polished. It feels like you're in the room with the band, watching the magic happen. And that to me was the nice middle ground, where I'm not going to come out with a fully polished, commercial thing, but I'm also not going to do the, TikTok challenges or the Quizlets, that seem to drive the most engagement on those platforms. So, but I don't know that I feel, the honest truth is, I don't know that I feel like I'm the right person to give advice, because I feel like I still have so far to go as an independent artist. The best advice I can give is make music that you love and that you feel great about and that means something to you and that has a unique voice. That's the stuff. You mentioned that you're a new parent. I've written a lot of songs about topics that not a lot of people write about. There are a lot of love songs. There aren't a lot of marriage songs. I've written, a song about a 25-year marriage. I've written multiple songs about being a father. I've written songs about working too hard for a living and, the miles and the toil of that. Those are topics that a lot of people can relate to that not a lot of songs are written about, and they're very authentic to my life. So those are the ones that have popped for me, because I feel like we're all looking for a story that you're the right person to tell. And so just be true to yourself. And then those ones, seems like you don't have to market them as hard. They seem to find people on their own.
Thank you very much for your perspective, Eric. And don't be a stranger, all right? Keep coming back. We'd love to have you on again real soon. When you got something new out, because you really enjoy this conversation. You are so extremely quotable, which we very much love for the social media algorithm.
Thank you, Ryan.
Our thanks to Eric Hirschberg and Zach Sloan. Our thanks to producer Lauren. And of course, our thanks to all of our viewers and listeners for checking out Break the Business. We'll see you next week.